Last time we were talking about how the classical period was a time when some of the greatest works of Greek literature, art were produced. It was a fantastic period in human history. That's why it's called the classical age, the classical Greece, because it was one of the great classics of not just Greek civilization, but of probably Western civilization in general. It was one of the great periods, one of the more productive periods, more creative and artistic in world history. But it was also a time of bitter war and conflict. And it's one of the ironies of history that a time of such great creativity and a great achievement was also a time of war and chaos and struggle. It's not unheard of, because if you look at Renaissance Italy in the 16th, 15th century, the golden age of Renaissance Italy was also a time of war and conflict within Italy. So maybe there's a connection there. Maybe people are very creative when they feel like their life's going to end at any moment. Who knows? But anyway, the Greece, in Greece you have the classical period is a period of war, and began when the two greatest city-states, the most powerful city-states, Athens and Sparta, actually came together and cooperated to face the mighty Persian Empire. And the Persian Wars ended with a great victory for the Greek city-states. They defended themselves successfully against a Persian invasion. But then things fell apart after that. And pretty soon the two great powers of the Greek world were at war with one another in the Peloponnesian War. And even when Sparta won the Peloponnesian War, defeated Athens, it wasn't over. You have the whole, after that, the 4th century BC is more conflict and more rivalry between the Greek city-states. And it ended rather harshly for the Greek city-states. The classical age ended with the conquest of Greece by a foreign power. The Macedonians, who were non-Greeks, ended up conquering Greece in the end of the 4th century by about 338 BC. So the classical period ends on a sour note for the Greek city-states in the sense that they lose their sovereignty and independence as a result of their exhausting wars against one another. So that's an overview of the classical period. What we're going to do talk about after that is how, after this end of this classical period, you have the Hellenistic period when the Macedonians, supported by the Greeks, conquered the Persian Empire. And during the Hellenistic period, you have an interaction and a kind of a synthesis of Eastern ideas with the ideas of the Greeks, the Hellenistic ideas of the Greeks. It's the Hellenistic period. And we'll hopefully get to that today. All right, so let's talk about the classical Greece first. Now, it began with the Persian Wars. And the Persian Wars was fought in two phases. The first was in 490. The second was 480 to 479 BC. So let's see if we can show a map here. All right, now the Persian Wars goes back to the fact that about the middle of the 6th century BC, during the days of King Cyrus, when the Persians were really expanding, the Persians conquered Ionia. Ionia is the western part of Asia Minor, or what is today Turkey, this region right in here. Now, the Persians set up a system where the Greek city-states were ruled by tyrants, were ruled by dictators who received money and support from the Persians. So the Ionia was ruled indirectly. And also, Ionia, the Persians were in their view, were very fair to Ionia in the sense that they honored the Persians honored Greek religion. They gave money to build Greek temples. They allowed the Greeks to have some self-government in the sense they were ruled indirectly by tyrants. But for the Greeks, being ruled by anybody was offensive, and the Greeks were very independent-minded. And about 499 BC, Ionia revolted. The Greek city-states overthrew their tyrants and declared their independence from Persia, and you have this Ionian rebellion from 499 to 494 BC. And this is what instigated the Persian Wars, because during the course of this Ionian rebellion, the city-state of Athens was asked to support this rebellion. The story is that the Ionian city-state sent representatives to Sparta, and the Spartan king at the time, when he met the representatives, found out how far Persia was and what would be involved in mounting a war against Persia, and the Spartan king said, "Thanks, but no thanks. We can't help you." But then he went to Athens, and and the Ionian representatives went and they spoke to the democratic Athens. They talked to all the people in a great assembly, and they talked about the Persians and their tyranny. And the Athenian democracy was all like, "Yeah, we support you 100%." And Herodotus, who is our main source of information, says that the Ionian ambassadors, they couldn't convince a Spartan king to go to help them in this war, but they could convince a mob. They could convince a bunch of democratic Athenians to say, "Oh yeah, we're with you 100%. Herodotus was not very friendly toward democracy. He thought it was a joke. But even though he had great respect for the Athenians in general. But anyway, so the Athenians said, "We're going to support Ionia. We're going to support our fellow Greeks." And so the Athenians sent money and troops to help the Ionians. Well, this war did not go too well. Essentially, what the Persians did is that they were able to convince one of the major city-states of Ionia to bail out, to kind of betray their other Greek city-states in the middle of a battle. And so in the middle of a battle, one of the city-states and their naval forces just left the scene, leaving the rest of the Ionian ships and their navy exposed. And the Persians easily won, defeated them. They crushed this insurrection, and it ended very badly. One of the leading cities of Ionia, Miletus, was burned to the ground. The thing about the Persians was that they considered themselves very just, and they thought they treated the Ionians quite well. And to have them rebel was considered to be a betrayal by the Persians. So the Persians decided that they were going to exact justice, and that meant that the city of Miletus was burned to the ground. All of its inhabitants were enslaved, and thousands upon thousands were sent into exile in what is today Afghanistan, to spend the rest of their lives. And the city was deserted. And so that was the end of that. Well, the king at the time, Darius, he decided that something had to be done, that as a result of the Ionian rebellion, that the Athenians needed to be taught a lesson. They didn't want other Greek city-states to get any ideas about supporting future rebellion. So Darius, the Persian king, decided to send a massive army, a massive fleet and army to defeat and destroy Athens, to subject it to slavery. Their idea was to reinstall one of the sons of Pisistratus as a puppet of the Persian rulers, and to exact their control over Athens. So what happened was that in about 490 BC, a great Persian fleet got together at Samos. Supposedly it had about 100,000 men under its control. And this fleet crossed the islands, and they landed here at a place called Marathon. Here's Marathon right here, on the east coast of Attica. Here's Athens, here's Marathon. And they landed there with this huge, giant army and fleet. And the Athenians sent out their army. Their army consisted of basically about 5,000 hoplites, 5,000 heavily armed troops. So you're looking at a pretty good odds for the Persians, 100,000 against 5,000. And the great battle was fought at the Battle of Marathon. Now, what the thing about it was that the Persians, one of their great sources of strength was they could put together huge armies, 100,000 strong. But the thing about the Persian armies was that almost all of the men, except for a core of Persians, were draftees. In other words, the Persians could put together huge armies because they had asked all their subject peoples, and not just asked, but demand that they send troops. So you had a huge army, 100,000 men, but a lot of them didn't want to be there. I mean, they were there because they had to be. Now, the Persians had excellent cavalry, probably one of the best cavalries in the world, but you know, that was a limited amount of men. Now, at the Battle of Marathon, what happened is that the Athenians waited. Why did they wait? They waited to attack until it got to a point where the cavalry, the Persian cavalry, was having to travel far away from the camp in order to forage for food, to feed this huge army. You know, they didn't have huge supply depots at that time. So once the army had been there for a time, they ran out of supplies on the ships, so they had to forage in the countryside to find food, to feed this huge army. So what the Athenians did, they waited till the cavalry had gone and far away from the camp, and that just left the rest of the draftees there. Well, the Athenians, with their heavy hoplite armor, they just charged. They charged the center of the line. And these draftees, they're like, they see these like huge Athenian guys with their full armor coming at them, full strength, screaming and yelling, and they just ran the other way. I mean, they're like, hey, I don't need to be here. I don't want to be here. And the army kind of collapsed, and it kind of fell apart. And the men tried to get back on the ships. The Persians tried to get back on the ships before they could be completely destroyed. So it ended up being a rout, and the Persians were defeated. Now, the Persians, this is a great story. The Persians were here with their fleet on the east coast of Attica, and after this defeat, they said, hey, the bulk of the Athenian army is in Marathon. Let's, as fast as we can, sail around here and go to Athens, because the city will be undefended. So that they got in their ships and they started sailing as fast as they could. Well, the Athenians realized, that all these Athenian hoplites realized that they needed to get back over to Athens as quickly as possible, because they knew their city was undefended. So they marched. Now, how long is a marathon? 26 miles. They marched 26 miles. They marched 26 miles after fighting a battle. That's pretty impressive. And it wasn't just a nice, flat, easy road. They had to go over a mountain. There's a mountain that separates the plain of Marathon from the city of Athens. So they had to go through a mountain pass, and they got there. And so by the time the Persian fleet arrived at the port of Athens, there was the Athenian army ready to go, waiting for them. And the Persians had just been defeated by that army, so they decided, hey, let's just leave. And so they got out of there. So it was the whole Battle of Marathon was one of the great achievements of the Athenians, and they were very proud of themselves. They were very proud, and the Athenians felt like this was one of their great moments of their history, to by themselves defeat this mighty Persian fleet and navy army that had appeared on their shores. Well, the story goes, according to Herodotus, that when Darius, from that point on, Darius swore vengeance upon the Athenians and upon all the Greeks. And he died, though, about 484 BC, and he was succeeded by his eldest son, Xerxes. Xerxes was actually the grandson of Cyrus, because Darius had married Cyrus's daughter. So Xerxes had he was as blue blood as you can get. Now, Xerxes decided he was going to not just attack Athens, but he was going to invade and conquer all of Greece. And supposedly he put together an army of 2 million men. Now, that's probably an exaggeration. Some people think it was more like 250,000, but according to the Greek historians, it was 2 million men. When you count all the soldiers and all the auxiliaries and all the troops that were involved. And but all of them, except for the Persian cavalry, were draftees. I mean, there was a huge force, but most of them were people who didn't want to be there. Now, the plan of Xerxes was simple. He was going to march his army and his navy. He had to, first of all, he had to build across the Hellespont here. He had to build a bridge, a land bridge, so he could cross his huge army, because his army assembled here in Asia Minor. And then the army marched along the shore here, Thrace, and the navy went along with them to provide them with support, to provide them with food, to support this huge, giant army. Well, when these things happened, the Greek city-states decided that to face this force, they needed to come together. They needed to fight and unite and fight. So Sparta and Athens decided to put aside any kind of hard feelings, and work together, and it was decided that since the Spartans had by far the greatest army and the strongest army and the most well-trained army, that the Spartans would command the united infantry, the land forces. Now, it was decided that Athens, on the other hand, would have command the naval forces. Now, the reason for this is that by this time, Athens had put together the largest fleet of any other state in Greece. Now, there was a reason for that. Some years earlier, about 20 years earlier, the Athenians had stumbled upon a huge new vein of silver. Attica had silver mines, and they discovered all this silver. And the Athenian assembly, the ecclesia, decided, let's use this money to build a fleet. Now, the thing about a fleet was that in those days, the success of a fleet, its military effectiveness, was based on having rowers. These fleets were, you had these banks of rowers. You know what a rower is, right? And they had to work together as a team. And the strength of the Navy was its rowers, because you could, if you had a good rowing team, you could build up a lot of speed, and your ships could just cram into other ships and sink them. That's how naval battles were fought back then. Plus, having a big, strong group of rowers, you could move a ship very quickly, because they could really get going if you had all those guys working as a team. Now, the other thing about rowers was that you didn't have to be wealthy to be a rower. So that meant that your poorest Athenian, who had nothing, could be a rower. To be in the infantry, you had to afford armor and a sword and a shield. That cost money. But to be a rower, you didn't have to have any of that. So you could be the poorest of the poor, and still feel like you were contributing to the Athenian military. So some people have argued, even Greek historians argued, that the Athenian navy furthered democracy, because it meant that even the poorest Athenian could contribute to the military and to the defense of the country by serving as a rower in the Athenian navy. So the Athenians had the biggest fleet thanks to their investment in building a fleet, and they were commanding the naval forces. Now, what happened was that the Persian army marched down the coast here, and when they got about right here, right in this area right here, you have a situation where the mountains and the sea come together, and it's called Thermopylae, and it's a point where, because of where the mountains come right to the seashore, there's just a very narrow pass for this huge Persian army to go through. So the Athenians and the Spartans, mainly the Spartans, decided, hey, this is a good place to put up a defense, because with this a small force, we can defend against a huge force of Persians. And so you have the great battle of Thermopylae, where you had this huge Persian army fighting against mainly the Spartans. The Spartans decided they were going to send 300 of their best Spartan soldiers to defend this pass. And for 3 days they defended it, yes.
Oh, I was just going to ask you again, why were they there? Like, why did they say that was a good place to defend?
Oh, because, okay, the mountains, if you look at a map here, you can't really see the mountains, but this is all mountains right here. Right. All this is all mountains. And right here you have the mountains, and then you have the sea right here. So unless the troops wanted to go through mountain passes, which they didn't, because that would be time consuming, the fastest way for them was to go on this very narrow plain between the sea and the mountains. But it was in such a place where they couldn't bring their full force, because the pass is only that big. It's only about 300 yards wide, basically. So the Spartans could put up a relatively small force and defend it against an attack at this point. Now, actually, there was a movie a couple of years ago. It's a great movie. It's not very historically accurate, but it's The 300. Have you ever seen that movie? That's a great movie if you have a chance to. It's actually, even though it's completely fabricated, it's actually based on ancient fabrications. It's really good. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian who wrote about this war, described it in heroic terms. And so the way that the movie portrays it is pretty true to the way that the ancient Greeks viewed this battle, as this heroic struggle, the mighty, powerful Spartans against the awe-inspiring Persians. Question?
So was Leonidas a real person?
Yeah, he was the king. No, Leonidas was the king of the Spartans, not the Persians.
So did he actually go to battle?
Yeah, the king, he died. He died in battle, fighting against the Persians. There's all kinds of, the Greeks loved to tell stories about Thermopylae because it illustrated for the Greeks, the bravery of the Spartans. Like supposedly, when the and then you can see this if you ever see the movie. Supposedly, the arrows that the Persians were shooting at the Spartans were so thick that it blocked out the sky. And they're shooting so many arrows. And the Spartans supposedly replied, "Good, now we can fight in the shade." Yeah, I like that. Don't you like that? And then during the battle, there was a Greek trader there, and Xerxes, the commander of the Persians, said to the trader, "Why are there only 300 Spartans here? We're attacking all of Greece with this massive army, and the Spartans send 300 men. What's going on here?" And the Spartan trader said, "Oh, it's the Olympic Games. You know, they had to go to the Olympic Games." And he said, "What? I mean, they're going to the freaking Olympic Games and their country's being invaded?" "Oh, yeah." He said, "Well, what's at the Olympic Games? What do they get if they win?" "Oh, they're number one. They get some oak leaves on their head." And he said, "These guys are insane. You know, their honor is so important to them that they risk everything so they can compete in games to get some oak leaves, to get honor. Wow, man, these guys are insane." So they love to tell those stories. Well, I love that story that we can fight in the shade. And another thing is the trader, supposedly Xerxes said, "What's going on? I want to find out about these people." So he sent some spies to kind of see what the Spartans were doing. And when he got there, the Spartans, he said, "Okay, the Spartans, they must be fearful. They must be shaking their boots, facing this mighty army of the Persians." And he said, what are the Spartans doing?" He said, they're like combing their beards. And he said, "What? They're combing their beards?" And he said, "Yeah, they like to look good when they die." You know? I don't know if that's true, but I love that story. But anyway, the Persians, I guess, you know, they like to look good. You know, they had these big furry beards, and they like to shave. You know, like to comb their beards out before they went into battle. They like to look good. You know. So anyway, fashionista Spartans. You know. But anyway, so the battle was fought, and eventually, I mean, another great image I have that you can have in Thermopylae is supposedly during the battle, the Persian king decided that if he could force his men just by sheer weight of numbers, they could drive back the Spartans. So he had his most loyal troops with whips, and they would whip the backs of the men to try to force them to just face the Spartans just by sheer numbers, and they could not fall back.
They utilized the phalanx maneuver when they were defending the strait, which it was an impenetrable wall of Spartans. Is what the Persians.
Yeah, exactly. It was a narrow space, and they couldn't get through it.
And
yeah, exactly.
They say today, Thermopylae, the strait there, is a lot further to the water than what it was back then. That back then it was a lot narrower.
Yeah, that could be true. I can't read. It's been 10 years since I've read books on the subject, more in detail. But that could be true. Now, so the Spartans were held on. Now, eventually, a Greek trader showed the Spartans a way showed the Persians a way to get around, and so the Persians were able, thanks to this trader, were able to get around and to surround the Spartans and ultimately destroy them. So the whole Spartan 300 army force and the king all died. So they were surrounded and killed by the Persians. Now the Persian army then advanced they advanced into central Greece, and their aim was to get to Athens. Here's Athens. And what the Athenians did at this point was they decided to put all of their faith in their navy. So all the Athenians abandoned their own city of Athens, and they all went to the island of Salamis here, off the coast, thinking that our navy will defend us. And so the Persians came in, and they were able to just burn Athens to the ground. And but all the Athenian people were on the island of Salamis. There's a great story. There's a story that all the dogs, they told them they couldn't bring their dogs because they only could fit a certain amount of people in their ships. So there's this great story of all the dogs swimming along the ships. It's kind of sad, isn't it? Because they didn't want to be without their masters. So then they were like, I love that story. But anyway, the Athenians went to this island to be safe. Now, the next thing that happened was that the next big battle was a naval battle. This time you had the Persian navy, which was mainly Phoenicians. They made up the bulk of they were the bulk of the Persian navy. You have the navy, the Persian navy, and you had a great naval battle near Salamis, this island, between the Athenian and their allied Greek forces and the Persian navy. And at the Battle of Salamis, the Greeks won the day. At the Battle of Salamis, the naval battle, led by the Athenians, the Greeks completely destroyed the Persian fleet at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BC. Well, after this battle, the Persians, without having a fleet, they couldn't support such a huge force. They couldn't keep them fed. So basically, the bulk of the Persian army had to leave Greece, but they still left an army of about, according to ancient accounts, 250,000 men there in Greece. But the bulk of the fleet and army, well, they didn't have a fleet anymore, but the bulk of the army went back. Well, in 479 BC, at the Battle of Plataea, to the north of Athens, that's where you had the Greek allied land forces against the Persian and their forces. And this battle was a little more comparable. The Greeks were able to put an army of about 100,000 men into the field. The Persians supposedly had about 250,000 men. And they had this big land battle at Plataea. This time it was the Spartans who led the victory. Salamis was a naval victory where the Athenians won the day for the Greeks. Plataea was a battle where the Spartan infantry, at the moment of the battle, they charged the Persian forces, and the Persian forces broke, and there was a general chaos among the Persians, and it was just a matter of the Greeks hunting down the remnants of the Persian forces and striking them down. One of the results of the Battle of Plataea was that the Greek forces were completely successful, and the Persian forces were completely obliterated. And Xerxes barely got out of there on a ship. He just kind of scuttled his way back home, completely humiliated. So the Persian wars end with the Battle of Plataea, with this great victory over the Persians, and the Persians being humiliated. And it was fought right about here, in this area, just to the, here it is, right here, just to the north of Athens, in central Greece. All right, now when this battle was over, the Greek city-state of Athens decided that they were going to leave the other Greek city-states and completely drive the Persians from the Aegean, completely drive the Persians out of all of the Greek city-states, liberate all of Greece and Ionia from Persian rule. The Spartans decided they weren't going to do that. The Spartans said, hey, we have helots at home we have to deal with. There was a threat of a helot rebellion, and the Spartans really didn't want to be away from their home territory for too long, for fear that might spark some helot rebellion. So the Spartans stayed home, but the Athenians took the lead in taking the war to the Persians. And in 477 BC, the Athenians formed the Delian League to fight the Persians. And they swore that they were going to completely drive the Persians out of all of Ionia, of all of the Aegean. And for the most part, they were successful. The Greeks, led by Athens, drove the Persians out of all of Ionia. And the Delian League was a great success. Now the problem is that, you see, once the Persians were gone, some members of the Delian League said, okay, well, the Persians are gone, time to break up the league. We don't need to have a league anymore because, well, the Persians are gone. They're no longer a threat. And so they wanted to end the Delian League. But you see, the Delian League had become a great financial support of money for the Athenians. You see, the way it worked with the Delian League was that the members of the league could either provide ships and men or provide money to the Athenians. Now, a lot of Greek city-states had opted just to give money to the Athenians. And the Athenians had collected a lot of money and built up their fleet. Now, it also helped out the Athenian democracy because all these poor Athenians, they could get jobs on the Athenian fleet and make some pretty good money. So the Athenians they weren't too thrilled with the idea of having the Delian League dissolve because it was a source of income for them. So what happened was that when Thasos decided they were going to leave the league, in 465, Thasos is an island in the Aegean. When Thasos said, hey, we're going to leave the league, the Persians aren't a threat, the Athenians says, no, once you're a member of the league, you're always a member of the league. No one leaves. And so Thasos went to war. And the Athenians crushed Thasos. They destroyed the city. They enslaved its inhabitants. And from that point onward, it was clear that the Delian League was no longer a league of free city-states allied with Athens. It was an Athenian empire where you paid your tribute or so be it, you were destroyed. So in a sense, the Athenians had become like the Persians, where you paid tribute and you contributed military forces to the Athenian empire, or you paid the ultimate penalty, having your city destroyed and its inhabitants enslaved. And now this created quite a ruckus among the other Greek city-states, because people said that Athens had become a tyrant, ruling and enslaving fellow Greeks. And then in the 430s BC, the Greeks decided to use money from the tribute to build the Acropolis. The Acropolis were the sacred place of Athens, where they had their most sacred temples to Athena, and it had been destroyed by the Persians. So in the beginning of the 430s, the Athenians decided they were going to build the Acropolis and rebuild the Temple of Athena and make it the most beautiful temple in all the world. And they did. I mean, the Acropolis is considered to this day to be one of the great achievements of, you can see a picture of it. This is, you can see here's the Parthenon, one of the main temples of Athena, the patron goddess of Athens. This is the ruins of the gate. I mean, even in its ruins today, it's pretty impressive. Imagine how this looked when it was all built up. Just give you some more pictures of it. I mean, it's pretty amazing, for different angles of it. That this temple was built over 2,000 years ago, 2,400 years ago, and it's still one of the most beautiful buildings ever built.
Didn't they build a replica in Nashville?
Yeah, there is a replica built of it in Athens, in Nashville. Yeah. Now the other Greek city-states, when they looked at this, they were thinking, "Hey, man, that's not too cool. This isn't cool. I mean, they're building this beautiful Acropolis and bringing glory to themselves at our expense." So a lot of Greek city-states didn't like that the Athenians thought they were all high and mighty. Now, one state that was really felt offended by the Athenians was Sparta. Because Sparta was used to being number one. Sparta was used to everybody praising Sparta, how great the Spartans were, how handsome they were, how brave they were, how virtuous they were, how excellent they were. Oh, those Spartans, they're just so great. And now people were saying that about the Athenians. Oh, look at those Athenians. Look what they've done. They built this great city. Read that speech by Pericles. You can read that speech. He was very proud of Athens. He was one of Athens' great statesmen of the day, as one of its great leaders, very influential with the Athenian population. And you could see the pride that he had in his city. And a lot of the other city-states, when they looked at Athens, they were jealous. They were envious. They were thinking, who does Athens think it is? It's better than everybody else. So, now eventually, Sparta decided that they had to take action against Athens. That Athens was too big for its britches, and members of the Peloponnesian League that Sparta led were also being offended. For example, in the 430s BC, Athens intervened in the affairs of some colonies of Corinth, which was one of the key members of the Peloponnesian League. And so Corinth was saying to Sparta, hey, you're supposed to be the leader of this league. Are you going to let the Athenians get away with that kind of behavior, interfering in our affairs, in the affairs of Greek city-states in the Peloponnesian League? What does Athens think it is? It already has its empire. Now it's trying to interfere in the Peloponnesian League. So Sparta decided it had to take action. And so eventually you have the outbreak in 431 BC of the Peloponnesian War. Now this Peloponnesian War, as you can see, lasted like 27 years. But it was an off and on war. It wasn't one continuous war. There was breaks in the war at different times. But it was a terrible war that ended in an Athenian defeat. And in a lot of ways, Athens kind of shot itself in the foot and was responsible for its own defeat. Now, when the war began, Pericles, the Athenian leader, said, look, we have the mightiest fleet in all the Greek world, and we have these walls that defend our city and our port. We have these long walls that connected the city of Athens to its port at Piraeus. And he said, let's just bring in all the people of Attica into the walls of Athens, and then we'll use our navy to provide us with food. Because we'll bring all the rural population into the city, and we'll use our fleet, which is the strongest in all the Greek world, to bring a steady flow of grain and food to keep our population fed, and whatever the Spartans throw at us, we'll be prepared. So the Spartans invaded Attica, but they couldn't breach the walls, and as long as the Athenians were being fed by the navy, they weren't going anywhere. So the Spartans would come in and burn the territory and pillage the farms, but the Athenians were able to hold on because of their fleet and because of their walls. Well, eventually what happened was that a plague broke out. You take a bunch of people and move them into temporary into these walls. The city was overcrowded, and this terrible plague struck and killed thousands of Athenians, including Pericles. He died in a plague. So the war didn't go well for the Athenians. But it didn't go well for the Spartans either, because what the Athenians did is they used their fleet to attack the Peloponnese, and they got the Helots to revolt. Remember, that was the Achilles heel of the Spartans, were their Helots. And so when the Helots revolted, that put pressure on the Spartans. So the Spartans were dealing with a Helot rebellion, the Athenians were dealing with a plague, and both sides were exhausted. So in 421 BC, both sides came to basically a ceasefire and agreed to end the war and just stop fighting each other. So you'd think, okay, that's the end of it. But that wasn't the end of it, because it didn't take long before the Athenians got back their gumption and wanted to expand. Now, one of the leading politicians in Athens was a man by the name of Alcibiades. He was famous because he was one of the pupils of the famous philosopher Socrates. And Alcibiades was very ambitious, and he had visions of becoming one of the great leaders in all of Greece. He wanted to be like Pericles. And he put forward this idea that Athens ought to conquer Sicily over in Italy. The leading city of Sicily was Syracuse. The idea would be that the Athenian Empire would expand and come to control all of Italy and Sicily, the Greek cities there, as well as their existing empire. So Alcibiades had this big vision of Athenian expansion, and the Athenians bought into it. So the Athenians decided to send a huge expedition to Syracuse to bring Sicily under their control. Now, unfortunately, what happened, though, is that the political opponents of Alcibiades accused him of impiety. They accused him of committing blasphemy against the goddess Demeter, one of the main goddesses worshipped by Athens. And it's kind of, by our standards, it's kind of a humorous story. Some pranksters in the middle of the night went and chopped off all the herms. Every Athenian home had a herm, which was a stone pillar with a statue, a bust of Hermes on it, but the key figure of the pillar was a phallus, an erect penis that was attached to the stone pillar. Now, they had this at every home. It was considered to be a source of fertility. It would bring blessing to the home. And every household in Athens had a pillar. Well, in the middle of the night, somebody went through and broke off all the penises. Now, we think that's funny. Like, oh, man, it was funny. But for the Athenians, that was a blasphemy. It was blasphemy because it was an offense against the gods. It was an act of impiety. And some people said that Alcibiades, who had a reputation for being a prankster, being a kind of impious and crazy, that he was involved. And so what happened was that they were going to bring charges against Alcibiades, and he didn't want to face charges for fearful that he would lose a court case. So he went into exile to Sparta, of all places. But you see, these events cost the Athenians probably their best commander. Alcibiades was the brains behind the Syracuse expedition. He was the guy supposed to lead it, and now he's out of the picture, going to live in Sparta in exile. So that left, basically, we're talking about the Athenians shooting themselves in the foot. That put the Syracuse expedition on a bad footing because they didn't have a commander. In fact, the commander of the forces was a man by the name of Nicias, who was a big believer in peace and didn't want military expeditions. So the guy commanding this big, huge military expedition is the one guy who didn't want to be there, who was against military adventurism. Well, anyway, it didn't go very well. The Syracuse expedition ended in complete failure. The Athenians were defeated. Syracuse defended itself. The irony of it all was that Syracuse was a democracy, just like Athens. So they were fighting against a fellow democracy, and they lost. And the Athenian army and navy were completely destroyed. Well, Alcibiades over in Sparta, he had become one of the special advisors to the Spartan kings. And Alcibiades says, now's the time to attack. Athens is weak. Now's the time to invade. But when you invade, don't leave. Build yourself a base in Attica and stay there year after year after year, and you'll put pressure on the Athenians and they'll buckle. So Alcibiades is now giving advice to the Spartans. And so the Spartans take his advice, and in 412 BC they renew the war. Seeing that Athens is weak and had taken this huge punishment, they invaded Attica and they established a garrison there, and they just kept themselves burning and destroying and looting all year round, and freeing slaves, and that was a terrible position for the Athenians to be in. Now Alcibiades got his for betraying his country because shortly thereafter these events he was having an affair with the Queen of Sparta, and he was caught and he had to leave Sparta. So he had to leave Athens, now he had to leave Sparta for sleeping with the Spartan queen. And she even boasted about it. She said, the rulers of Sparta will be the descendants of Alcibiades. And that was too much for the Spartans to take. In fact, the son that was born to the queen, they refused to allow him to be Spartan king, just because they suspected that he was really the son of Alcibiades, not the Spartan king. But anyway, now the Spartans decided that if they were going to defeat Athens, they had to have a navy of their own, because they didn't have a navy. They needed to use a navy to cut off the Athenians from their supplies, because as long as Athens had a navy, they could just keep on bringing food to their country, even though the Spartans were occupying the countryside of Athens, Attica. So anyway, so what the Spartans did is they went to Persia, and they said, look, Persia, we don't care about Ionia. We'll let you have it back. Just give us some money, and so we can build a fleet. And the Persians were fine with that. So the Spartans got a fleet by basically handing over Ionia back to Persia. They got money from Persia. They used the money to build their own fleet. And at the Battle of Aegos Potami in 404 BC, at this battle in the Hellespont area, the Athenian fleet was destroyed. It was one of the only times in the whole war that the Athenian fleet was defeated. So the Athenian fleet got pretty much destroyed, and that left Athens open for invasion. Now Athens could be both besieged by land and by sea because they didn't have a navy anymore. Their navy had been destroyed at the Aegos Potami. And so right after this battle, Athens was forced to surrender. Now there were some Greek city-states who wanted the Spartans to destroy Athens, burn it to the ground, and enslave its inhabitants. And say, hey, look, let's do to Athens what Athens has done to other city-states. Let's teach them a lesson. But the Spartans said, no, the Athenians have done great things for Greece, and they're a great people. We respect them. We're going to destroy their walls, but we're not going to destroy the Athenians. And they didn't destroy the Athenians. So got to give them Spartans credit for that. Now, you'd think that everything would be cool now. The Spartans were number one. They had won the day. Everything's cool, right? But, you see, the Spartans kind of got big heads at this point. They decided that they weren't going to hand over the territory to Persia. They retained control of Ionia and set up puppet governments in all of Ionia. And they also began to intervene in the affairs of other Greek city-states. So a lot of Greek city-states were thinking to themselves, look, these Spartans are no better than the Athenians. They're going around all high-handed, intervening in the affairs of other Greek city-states. This is unacceptable. So about 394 BC, Thebes and Athens, they went to the Persians. And they said, look, you know, the Spartans, they were supposed to hand over that territory to you. They didn't. You give us money, you can do whatever you want with whatever you want to do. Just give us the money so we can fight against Sparta. So the Corinthian War was a war that was fought when you had a group of Greek city-states led by Athens and now Thebes. And these city-states formed an alliance with Persia and to fight against Sparta. And this war waged on, the Corinthian War, 394 to 387 BC. Now, finally the Spartans decided, you know what? Enough's enough. So the Spartans, they went to the king of Persia. They went to Persia and said, look, we'll give you all of Greece. We're going to surrender all of Greece to you. Just make us number one and give us the money we need to build our fleet. And don't support our enemies. And the Persian king said, yeah, sounds good to me. I'm the ruler of Greece now, and all of you are my slaves. And the Spartans said, yeah, that's cool. As long as we're the ones who institute the peace and make sure that the peace is kept intact. So in 387, the Spartans surrendered all of Greece to Persia, and the Persians said, we recognize Sparta as the number one Greek city-state. So Sparta was all proud, hey, we're number one, but what was the price? The price was that, at least in theory, all of Greece was now subject to the Persian Empire. But the Persians were smart in the sense that they wanted indirect rule. They didn't want to rule with garrisons and direct rule. They allowed their rule to be instituted through the Spartans. So Sparta was able to reestablish its hegemony. They were the number one state, but the price was that they surrendered the sovereignty of the Greek city-states to the Persian king. That's why it's called the King's Peace, because it was the king of Persia who dictated the terms of the peace. Now, a lot of Greek city-states weren't too happy with this. And so about 378 BC, Athens and Thebes formed a new league. It's called the Second Athenian League, to wage war against Sparta. And in 371 BC, the Spartans decided to take action against Thebes. And at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, the Spartans came in and they were defeated. The Battle of Leuctra is very significant because it was the first time in a real battle between infantries that the Spartan infantry lost. Now, one of the reasons why the Spartans lost is because Thebes had learned that if you have a professional group of men who are armed to the teeth and ready to fight at all times, that can give you success. And so what the Thebans had done is created what was called the Sacred Band. This is a group of soldiers who all they did was train and fight and get strong, and they were like professional soldiers. And it was called the Sacred Band. And this Sacred Band, when they went up against the Spartans, they won the day. So Thebes won the day. They defeated Sparta. Now, the commander of the Sacred Band, a man by the name of Epaminondas of Thebes, he said, look, if we want to defeat Sparta, we got to take it to them. We got to go and defeat the Spartan, get them at their Achilles heel. We got to start a Helot rebellion. So Epaminondas, after the Battle of Leuctra, he invaded the Peloponnese, and he freed the Helots. The Messenian Helots were freed, and they were able to establish their independence of Sparta. So the Spartans were deprived of their Helots. And once the Spartans lost those Helots, they couldn't put into the field that professional army anymore. The Spartans actually had to do their own work. You know what I'm saying? They had to do their own agricultural labor because they couldn't count on the Helots to be their slaves anymore. Because Epaminondas had freed the slaves. He had freed the Helots. He's like the Abraham Lincoln of Messene. He freed the Helots and made them independent, and that was the death blow to Spartan hegemony. But what happens with the Thebans? Oh yeah, now they're number one. Thebes think, we want to be number one in Greece. And so what happens is that the Spartans and the Athenians get together and they say, look, now Thebes thinks it's number one. We need to work against them. So Athens and Sparta, who had been hated each other for generations, they came together because they found a mutual enemy in Thebes. So Thebes was now number one. They're thinking, oh, we're hot stuff. But Thebes is facing this war. So the Thebans go to the king of Persia. And the Thebans say, look, we're going to hand all of Greece to you, but Thebes needs to be number one, not Sparta, Thebes. So you have a second king's peace, a new king's peace, but now it's Thebes is number one, and all the other Greek city-states are played second fiddle to Thebes. So Thebes was willing to sacrifice the sovereignty of the Greek city-states so that Thebes could be the mightiest city-state in all of Greece. Well, eventually, the other Greek city-states said enough's enough. And so what happened was that an alliance was formed. Sparta and Athens and other Greek city-states decided to challenge Thebes. And at the Battle of Mantinea in 362 BC, a great battle was fought. And the thing about this battle was it was indecisive. I mean, Epaminondas, the great military leader, the great diplomat of Thebes, he died in this battle. So that was a big blow to Thebes. But there was no real winner. Everybody died. I mean, it was a big battle, but there was no clear winner. So it left a situation where all of the Greek city-states were just exhausted. They had lost thousands of lives. They had wasted all these resources, and they were all spent. And so it left a situation where you had Athens, you had Thebes, you had Sparta, but none of the Greek city-states was in a position, economically or in terms of resources, to try to be number one. And that left the door open to foreign occupation and foreign conquest. But it wouldn't be the Persians, it would be the Macedonians. All right, well, why don't we take a little break here for a couple minutes here. And what I want you to do, take a little break and, oh, you have a question?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to ask, so in like 400 years of existence, the Spartans were never defeated in the Troas.
They never lost. They lost some minor skirmishes, but this was literally the first time they'd ever in a face-to-face infantry versus infantry, where they had just been, in a fair fight, got whipped. So what I want you to do today is, okay, when we talked about the Iliad and the Odyssey and the ideas that the Greeks had about honor and virtue and excellence and all that, what's the connection between Greek values and you think this constant competition for power and hegemony? What was about it? What was distinct about Greek culture that you could almost expect them to constantly be at each other's throats? All right, and waging these wars against each other. So think about that in these groups after you take a break and stretch, and then we'll come back together and I'll ask one of the groups to come up with some ideas. All right, we'll take about 5 minutes or so for that. Okay, how do you connect the values that the Greeks had, like as illustrated in the Iliad and the Odyssey, especially the Iliad, with some of the events of the classical period?
Well, what we came up with, we think their values are basically why they were at war all the time, because they had a lot of pride.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a lot, they felt honor was very important. So they felt they had to stand up for their country and go to war, and also they didn't want to get defeated.
That's right, because if you're defeated, that's like the worst thing that can happen, is being number two, right? But we all know what going number two means. Just think that's a good mnemonic advice, Being number two means like you're, refuse. You're not worth anything. So the Greeks being number two was, you don't want to be number two. So losing is a terrible thing. You never want to lose. Yeah, what do you
say in the Odyssey when Odysseus was voted like warrior of the month or whatever, Ajax couldn't take defeat, so he killed himself.
That's just one of the myths from the. That's not. I don't know if that's in the Iliad. It might be referenced in the Odyssey, but it is one of the Greek myths. It's that one of the great heroes was Ajax. You know how they decided? There was these. Actually, they decided because they. The story goes is that Ajax and Odysseus were these great heroes at Troy, and they wanted to give the armor of Achilles to the greatest hero, the most brave hero. So they couldn't decide who was the bravest hero. So they decided to send spies among the Trojans, and and whoever the Trojan women were saying was the handsomest and bravest of the Greeks, that's who they would say would be the bravest. They're letting the women decide of the enemy. So they sent spies, and all the Trojan women said, "Ooh, do you see that Odysseus? He's hot. Ooh, yeah, he's so brave." And so when the word got out that the Trojan women were saying that Odysseus was hotter than Ajax and braver and stronger, they gave the money, they gave the trophy to Odysseus, and Ajax was so just his honor had been, like you said.
Were they friends though?
Yeah, they were friends. Yeah, he committed suicide because not being number one was so terrible to him. He'd rather be dead than be number two to anybody.
They're vain.
What?
They're vain.
They're very vain. Yes, they were very vain. They're like those Spartans combing their beards. Want to look good, want to die, man. Doing their hair, you know.
Now you understand.
That's probably a good reason why pride is one of the 7.
That's right. That's true. That's true. All right. So very good, guys. Very good discussion. All right. Now, even though I talk too much, anyway, I need to work on that. I was told I would let you all talk more because I'm too much about blah blah blah. But anyway, so if I ever talk too much, just let me know. Even I'll shut up. Let you guys talk more. All right. So anyway, what I want to let's talk about. We talked about these wars and violence and destruction and chaos. What was so great about the classical period? Now, some people call when they talk about the Greek classical period, they call it an age of enlightenment. They kind of see it as kind of a precursor to, let's say, the scientific revolution of the 17th century. They see it as planting a seed that would fully develop with the advances of science that you see in the modern era. And in many ways, you can see that. And there are some links. And in many ways, the achievements of the Greeks in this period did kind of set the stage for future scientific advances in later periods. Because the Greek achievement was something that was honored down through the centuries. And the works of classic Greek writers were studied for centuries by Europeans, future Europeans. One of the things we see happening is that there was a lot of questioning by the Greeks. The Greeks were questioning traditional values and beliefs and questioning the way that they had traditionally looked at the world. And there were a group of writers in the 5th century. They were called sophists, which means wise men. There was a term of derision because wise men can also mean wise guys. Wise guys. But the sophists were these group of writers who were questioning everything that the Greeks held most sacred. They were using the power of reason to do that. They were saying, look, it's look at these myths and traditions logically and show that they're just a bunch of tales that are unbelievable. Let's use reason. Protagoras, for example, was famous for saying, man is the measure of all things. That what we see and what we touch and what we feel, our senses are the only real measurement that we should use to guide and understand the world around us. Traditions about gods and heroes, they're just stories. The only thing that really matters is what we see and touch and feel and what we can perceive with our senses and understand with our reason. Another great thinker, Democritus, he said, look, I think the world comes together by chance, that the world is just the chance meeting of atoms. He said that all matter could be broken down into atoms, and that these atoms, the chance meetings of atoms was the result that there is no reason to the universe. The universe is just a result of chance, the colliding of atoms in a big swirl. And that's what the world is. And that was a big blow to traditional values and beliefs. That there's no meaning to the universe. It's just accidental collisions of atoms. And then Empedocles was another great thinker of the day. He said, look, no, the world is a result of forces, of conflicting forces waging war against each other. The heat versus cold, hot versus cold. What's another opposite? Help me out, guys.
Sky and wind.
Yeah, earth and sea. We actually talk about the 4 elements: earth,
Fire,
water, fire. Earth, water, fire, and air. And that these elements were in conflict with each other. These 4 elements, and these conflicts between the elements was what drove the world. So these people weren't talking about gods. They weren't talking about anything like that. They were saying that the world was created by natural forces. Now, another important thing that happened at this time was that a lot of these sophists were also very skilled at rhetoric, the art of persuasion, the ability to use your language to convince people. And some of these sophists said that you could, if you were convincing enough, you can convince people to do whatever you wanted them to do. That if you have the power to convince and to persuade people, you can make Eskimos buy ice. You know, you can make people do whatever you wanted to do if you just have the power to use your words to manipulate and control people. And so there were these. Some of the sophists made money by teaching these techniques, kind of like advertising today, or marketing people. These rhetoricians could make a fortune. Some of these sophists made fortunes because they said, "We'll teach you how to convince anybody to do anything. We'll teach you through words. You can go and give a speech and persuade anybody." Because remember, in Athens, you had jury trials. In Athens, you had the assembly. So being able to speak persuasively, either in a court case or before the assembly, was something that would give you power and influence because you could speak persuasively. So some of these sophists made pretty good money teaching the art of rhetoric to anybody who had the money to pay for it. Now, another achievement of this period is the realm of poetry. In Athens, you had every year you have these poetic competitions. You have these dramas that we produced, these great plays, and you had the 5th century BC in Athens was the heyday of the great Greek playwrights. Like Euripides was probably the more famous of them. You had Aeschylus and Euripides and Sophocles, but Euripides is probably one of the more famous ones. And they were producing these plays. There were every year you'd have a big all these plays that would be performed, and they were part of the religion of Athens, because all plays were in honor of the god Dionysus, the god of fertility and wine. And they produced these plays. Now, a lot of times these plays were about myths. They told the stories of gods and heroes. But for the Greeks, they believed that a lot of times these myths could serve as teaching tools. In other words, a great playwright was supposed to use plays and poetry in the plays to try to teach morals, to teach right and wrong. So these myths, these tragedies that are produced by Euripides, these great plays, it was music, it was poetry, it was more like opera than like just a play like we think of a play. But these great performances, the reason why these works are considered to be of universal value is because the Greek playwrights like Euripides, they address all these issues that are still important today, like right and wrong, and what's right and what's wrong. Should we follow the law, or should we follow our conscience? You're reading in the Doctrines of World History, you're reading the play Antigone, a fragment of it by the great playwright Sophocles, and it concerns an issue that is always a big issue. Do you follow the law of the land, or do you follow your conscience? Do you do what's right in your heart, or do you, if the law says this is the way it's going to be, do you follow the law? So those are the kind of questions. Euripides wrote a play called the Medea, where a woman has to decide between loyalty to her children or loyalty to her own self, and she's just torn, and she ends up she hates her husband so much because he leaves her that she kills her own children to spite her own husband, and she's obviously insane. But then she gave this great speech that's still read today about how it sucks to be a woman in a misogynistic culture where women are expected just to be loyal to their husbands at any cost. Their husbands can do whatever they want, and women are supposed to be loyal all the time. And she says, "Screw that! And screw the system. I'm killing my kids. I'm out of here. I'm a witch." She was a witch. She had magical powers. But anyway, she flew away on a chariot drawn by dragons. There's some women who like to do that, get on the dragon, slip away from their disgusting husbands. But that's what she did. But she was challenging traditional morals and values. That's what Euripides was doing. We have this set idea where women are how women are supposed to act, and here we have Medea kind of transgressing every rule. And it was, and so a lot of times people can read Medea today, and say, look, maybe those those are still true today. You know, what is the proper role of gender role of man and woman and husband and wife and all that? It was being discussed in 5th century Athens. It's still being discussed today. That's why these poems have universal appeal, even though they were written over 2,400 years ago. Also, you had works like Herodotus and Thucydides. Historians, some of the first works of history were written in this time period. Herodotus and Thucydides are the first historians that we know about who wrote about the human condition and wrote about it in a kind of critical manner. You know, not just by doing an investigation, but looking at the sources and trying to learn what the past can teach us. Socrates, we mentioned him earlier as Alcibiades' teacher. Socrates was a great philosopher. He was a man of the street. He was a common man in Athens who never wrote a thing, but challenged people all the time in the marketplace. He'd always challenge people about what's right, what's wrong. How do you make decisions about what is the right thing to do? When people ask Socrates, well, how do you make your decision? He said, well, I have a little voice in my head, a little daimonion, a little conscience that kind of tells me what's right and what's wrong. That's what I follow. I don't care what the state says. And they put him to death for that question.
You said Socrates didn't actually write anything?
Yeah.
So Plato's Republic was just like a...
Oh, what happened with Socrates was that Plato, who's one of his main disciples, wrote down all these dialogues where Socrates was a featured speaker. One, it's called the Socratic question. Some people, to what degree was Plato, when he was writing these dialogues, was he kind of making things up out of thin air? Or to what degree was he actually reporting on what Socrates, his teacher, actually said? But but Socrates never wrote it. He was a great speaker and talked to people all the time. Like I said, he had some very controversial pupils like Alcibiades. And then all this talk about how a little demon in his head told him what to do and what was right and what was wrong. He was accused of introducing false gods. And eventually he was condemned to death by the Athenians. And he drank hemlock. In fact, one of the jokes is the first great democracy in history killed the first great ethical philosopher in history. That's one of the ironies. You know, power of the people, democracy, yeah, but they killed Socrates. But anyway, that's always been used against Democrats, democracy in general. One of the critics of democracy is that mob rule often leads to the mob being easily manipulated by powerful forces to do the wrong thing. Anyway, now another thing was that Plato was also like I said, a student of Socrates, and he's considered to be one of the great philosophers in the Western tradition. You know, in fact, he was the one who divided the study of philosophy or the study of wisdom and knowledge into three fields: the physics, the study of nature, the study of the soul, which is considered psychology, and the study of right and wrong or ethics. And he was a great and prolific writer, and in many ways he's like the founder of Western philosophy. But he took his inspiration from Socrates. So Plato and his student Aristotle are considered to be some of the great philosophers that came out of the 4th century. Also, this period saw, I'm almost done here, guys, saw a period, some great achievements in sculpture and in the arts. We already looked at the Acropolis. Just to show you something, when the Greeks, in the Archaic period, when the Greeks made sculpture, they imitated the Egyptians. Here's your typical archaic sculpture, very reminiscent of the way that pharaohs were presented. You know, very stiff, very formulaic. But then when you get to the classical period, the Greeks were more naturalistic, you know, showing the beauty of the physical of the body, and so it's a lot more naturalistic appearance. And so Greek sculpture really came into its own during the classical period. All right, so that's why the classical period kind of give you a quick survey of some of the great achievements of the classical period. Now listen up, guys, because I know you guys would always like to know when you don't have to study terms on the exam, right? We didn't get the Hellenistic period, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put those on the next test. So I'll send you a list of terms on the study guide that you would need to study that will be put on exam 2. All right? So look for that email, because I didn't really cover the Hellenistic period, but I will cover it on Monday after the exam. All right. And make sure you give me your folder. So I'll see you on Wednesday for the exam.